Do you realize that you have the most beautiful face? Do you realize we're floating in space? Do you realize that happiness makes you cry? Do you realize that everyone you know someday will die? And instead of saying all of your goodbyes, let them know you realize that life goes fast. It's hard to make the good things last. You realize the sun doesn't go down, it's just an illusion caused by the world spinning round. Do you?
Jack! Yeah! How's it going? How are you doing today?
Good.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us for our 4th networking party. We have been looking forward to this for quite some time. This is probably our largest counter-economic farmers market thus far. And hopefully it only continues to grow. But Jack, before we get into the deep questions about stuff, can you tell everyone who you are, please?
Okay, yeah, I'm Jack Shimek, and like it said in the event page, this is kind of a homecoming for me because I've probably been right in the space you're in before, because I went to the University of Texas, and I have no idea what store was there in 1970, but I've been there. And so I went to university, graduated there in '73, and that's where I really got my introduction to the libertarian movement. And it was in a history class in the BEB 150 lecture hall. And it's kind of a funny story, but I was so tired from staying up late at night talking about things that I kind of nodded off to sleep, and I started leaning over against the guy next to me. So he shoved me back. Anyway, we got to be good friends, and he was an objectivist, or a student of objectivism then. And later I started going to a group there called Objectivism Study Group, OSG. And it goes on and on from there. But
Sure. Awesome. Well, before we get into any specific questions about agorism or agorism, can you please tell us the correct pronunciation?
well, I don't want to be like the pronunciation Nazi here, so I'll just tell you how the two pronunciations came about. And for the longest time, I didn't even know where the agorism pronunciation came in, because I had met and was good friends with Sam Kunkin, and he always pronounced it agorism. And he had a buddy, kind of a fanboy, that hung around with him all the time, a few years younger, and his name was Neil Schulman, or J. Neil Schulman. And he cited some pronunciation rule, and by the way, I just learned this from him last summer. But he said, yeah, according to such and so pronunciation rule, it should be agorism. And so apparently he nagged Sam about that over and over, and Sam said, I don't care, I pronounce it agorism. So since I didn't like hanging around with Neil, I never heard of the agorism pronunciation. I only heard Sam's pronunciation.
Yes.
So for decades later, I get online and I see there's a a book on tape version of the New Libertarian Manifesto, and Mike Gogolski is pronouncing it agorism, and I went, oh, that hurts me to hear that. It's so grating. Somebody's mispronouncing the word. So I contacted him, and he says, well, I don't care. I'm not going to redo the YouTube video, so.
Right.
But yeah, Neil confirmed that last summer that he started pronouncing it agorism. So.
You mentioned Konkin. Can you tell us who Samuel Edward Konkin III is and how you may have known him?
Okay, yeah. By the way, during his lifetime, he hated to be called Sam because his father was named Sam Konkin, and he was a socialist up in Alberta, Canada. So Sam liked to go by Samuel Edward Konkin III, but who's going to want to say all of that? So we all call him Sam anyway. What happened was after I graduated at University of Texas, I put an ad in Reason magazine because they used to have a classified ad section, and I put an ad in that I was a mechanical engineer looking to work for other libertarians if possible. So I actually got an offer, moved up to the Northeast in Pennsylvania originally, worked for some objectivists, and they had a company that made heating and air conditioning electronic control systems. So the name of the company was Galt Control. It's after John Galt. Mm-hmm. And I was close enough to New York City to go in on the weekends, and there was a laissez-faire bookstore there at, it was either 206 or 208 Mercer Street, because it actually moved from one location to the other. Mm-hmm. But my goal was just to hang out there and meet other libertarians. I was like 23 years old. I was all excited. I was just reading all this stuff. So sure enough, I did. And there was a debate one day in the back room of the bookstore. And I hope Brave New Books is bigger than Laissez-Faire Books was at that time, because it was basically just a front room and a back room. I presume we're in the back room here, huh?
Yeah, we have a front room and a back room here, actually.
Okay, well this is how it all happens. All the good stuff's in the back room. But anyway, Sam was debating Gary Greenberg, who was the chairman of the Free Libertarian Party of New York, and he was debating him about why libertarians shouldn't get into political activism, I mean parliamentary political activism, and why it was a bad idea. And at the time, I actually was in the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania, and this radical libertarian stuff was a little bit scary. It was a little bit, it's not going along with the system, and what is this all about? So I just kind of, I listened. I don't remember if I started asking questions then, but anyway, I got to know him. I'd go up there like every weekend, every other weekend sometimes. So pretty soon we got to know each other, and that thing where I said we would walk around the streets of New York City, it was just because I was being a little fanboy, and he had to run errands. And I just said, well, I got one more question. He says, okay, you can ask it, but I gotta go here. So I'd follow with him, and we had a lot of really, really interesting conversations there. And that's how I got to know him.
Right. And I don't know if you said it in your response just then, but just in case anyone's wondering, Samuel Edward Konkin III is the father of agorism. He thought of the idea and coined the term. And that's the New Libertarian Manifesto right there. Jack is going to make you read it. If you don't know, another name for our organization, Alliance of Austin Agorists, is the Church of Konkin. And right now you're here. Okay, Jack, agorism on agorism.info, they define agorism as libertarianism, the ideology that libertarianism exists in the real world through the practice of counter-economics. I was wondering if you could break that down into an easier to understand way, maybe without all the liberty jargon attached to it.
Without all the liberty jargon, huh? Well, let me think. Well, just a little historical backdrop will help this. And before I even do that, I really want to put a plug in for the bookstore itself and the fact that, as I understand it, Harlan ordered some copies of this.
Yeah, he did.
And, I'm going to go through a lot of stuff probably fairly fast today. And if you want to find the background behind it, do what Joel says and read Konkin.
Nice.
So, because every time I reread it, I find something else in there. But anyway, the historical background is this. When I came up to New York City and met Konkin, he was fighting with the Libertarian Party. And I thought then that libertarianism and the Libertarian Party were the same thing. And Konkin explained, no, the Libertarian movement started, and of course there's been a freedom movement throughout history. It started in roughly '69, and the history is in the manifesto there. And he says, but the Libertarian Party came along a couple of years later, and people thought it was a joke. Funny, you know, we're for freedom and we're against majority rule, but we're going to go out and vote for that. Ha ha ha! What a joke! And but sure enough, it caught on in the minds of a lot of people. And he says, "No, wait, hey, this is just a joke, right? You're not serious." And so he started essentially fighting the Libertarian Party, and one of his tactics was to use parliamentarianism against itself. And by that I mean he joined the Libertarian Party, created a radical caucus within the party, and then floated a proposal or a motion to dissolve the party. And that was the way he figured that libertarians could get rid of the monster that was the Libertarian Party. So then he gets kind of a reputation of being negative and not having, you know, something positive to offer. So he's pondering this. He says, okay, well then, what is it that I'm really for? And he's thinking about it, and finally I come back one weekend and visit him again, and he basically had this eureka, I've got it kind of thing. He says, the thing is, even the very word libertarian is essentially being destroyed by the Libertarian Party. So I may even have to call this something else. So he comes up with the Greek word agora for marketplace, and his conclusion is to really get to a libertarian end, you had to only use libertarian means. And agora being the marketplace, agorism being any marketplace practice, the economy being capital E economy, that being the economy that the state and the ruling class essentially have created and have complete control over, then he says we need to create a counter economy. And you got to remember at the time there was the hippie movement, they had a term called counterculture, you know, and essentially dressing differently and everything was countercultural. So Konkin's counter-economy was just another play on that terminology. So that was way longer than the short answer that you asked for.
No, it's fine. So was he successful in dispelling the Libertarian Party, or were there a lot of essentially agoraphobic people there?
Agoraphobic, I like it. No, the party went on, and then there were folks in the party that said, I agree with you, I'm a philosophical anarchist, but I'm still going to work through the party. So a lot of times Konkin would coin a term to describe the phenomenon that was going on, and he was kind of funny that way. He was a very creative guy. So a partyarch, that's somebody who was an anarchist, but they believed in working through the party. Mm-hmm. Or the minarchists are the ones that believed in minimum government. So we call them minarchists.
He coined that word, right?
Yeah. Every weekend I go up there, there'd be 2 or 3 new words. I'd have to ask them, what do you mean by that? What do you mean? What does that mean?
Right.
So the thing that has puzzled me all this time is why agorism hasn't gotten more traction as an approach. And I have to think it's like it's an adrenaline rush for you to run as a candidate and for you to struggle against the powers that be every step of the way.
Or load a shotgun in a gun-free zone.
Yeah, no comment. But yeah, that kind of thing. So I think that, especially there was a big rush for the Libertarian Party in 1972 when Roger McBride, he was a Republican elector from Virginia, he cast an electoral vote for John Hospers, who was the Libertarian Party candidate. So that one thing gave everybody hope for the next decade or two, and they said, wow, we can really make it. We got one electoral vote. And unfortunately, that shot of adrenaline, isn't enough to like make us more free. It made people, put their time, money, and energy into the Libertarian Party instead of building the counter economy.
Yeah. So I guess that means you're not standing with Rand in 2016.
Stand with Rand. No, to tell you the truth, I don't even follow who's running when or where, but I know who you're talking about.
Sure. Well, speaking of that, how do you feel about doing sort of a no one for president campaigning?
Well, we actually, I only had this 2-year time frame knowing Sam on the East Coast, and he started a thing called the counter campaign. So he's playing on that counter theme again. So we made up stickers and posted them all over New York City and all over whatever town that said, vote for nobody. Oh, I should have brought that t-shirt out. So we would always have slogans like, nobody keeps his campaign promises. Nobody lowers your taxes. Nobody will end the war. Vote for nobody. So it injected a lot of humor into things. And you can talk to people, and once you got them laughing, you broke the ice.
Yeah, cool. We've talked before about civil disobedience versus agorism and the importance in making the distinction between these two strategies for change. Can you talk a little bit about inside the system activism versus outside the system activism, and also maybe a little bit about why it's important? Man, turn it off.
Yeah, too.
I can see you now too.
Okay, good.
Okay.
You were saying we talked about civil disobedience.
Yeah, we talked about civil disobedience and the parliamentary process versus agorism. And we've talked before, and you had me draw a line down the middle of the piece of paper, and highlighting what inside the system activism is versus outside the system activism. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Okay, well, there was a big, I'm up in New Hampshire, and the Free State Project is pulling a lot of people up there. So, there were a lot of folks that thought, getting freedom was all about, getting elected, things like that. So there were other people that weren't interested in that, and they were more interested in civil disobedience. But they were starting to call themselves outside the system. And the fact of the matter is, most civil disobedience is really inside the system in this sense, and I'll tell you how. And by the way, Ben Stone, the Bad Quaker, he wrote an article about this recently. But here's the diagram. I don't know how it'll show up, but I don't know if that shows up at all.
Yeah, sort of. It's kind of blurry. Maybe you could just
okay, I'll verbal it. At the top, the way a democratic republic is supposed to work is the people. And then down from that, the people select representatives. Representatives write statute law, and then I'm going off the screen. But the executive department enforces the law. They have police. And you go out and break one of the laws, you get arrested. And then you go into the court system. The court system could, even through appeals and up to the Supreme Court, they could go over and kind of change the statute law by declaring some of it unconstitutional. So let's say you're a black woman and you want to not move to the back of the bus, and that act of civil disobedience ends up in a court case. Does that one? What you're really doing is trying to change the law. Well, the law is part of that whole system, the whole governmental system that essentially we say is, as agorists, as libertarians, is a corrupted system of control that works to the advantage of essentially a ruling class. So it's not really outside the system to do civil disobedience. It's trying to alter the system.
Right.
Make the system work better.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Next question. How about we go here? Konkin describes agorism as new libertarianism and as a leftist movement. Given our current and modern understanding of the political right and left, can you clarify what that means?
Yeah, I'd have to say that the modern understanding of left and right isn't really that clear, and so this is kind of a compound question, but here goes. Konkin was at New York University, and there was a publication there called New Left Notes, and so he started one called NYU Libertarian Notes to counter the New Left Notes. So after a while he changed the NYU to NEW, so it was New Libertarian Notes. When you get into the manifesto, he describes a new libertarian as someone who's an agorist, who practices agorism. Then the left-right spectrum, and I think he pretty much coined the concept of left libertarianism, or that label. So if you go back to the time of the French Revolution, there was the Revolutionary Assembly, which included the New Liberals, the Democrats, and those terms in their original, meaning, liberal means pro-freedom, Democrat meaning power to the people, or devolving the power from the king and the aristocracy. So the liberals and Democrats sat on the left side of the hall, the authoritarians, the monarchy, the aristocracy, and the organized church sat on the right. So the spectrum, that left-right definition, came from that era. So libertarians there are squarely on the left. Now listen to some of their issues. And I've got this unpublished manuscript from another guy I met in New York of the time. And he listed that the issues for the left were the right of the people to own land. Well, you got to remember that this is not very far away from feudal bondage, being bound to the land of your baron, They were for the right of the people to hunt, because that's how they would get food. What happened was the aristocracy essentially took over the land and took over ownership of it, which, by the way, is why Proudhon said property is theft, because the newly defined property boundaries were acquired by legislative fiat. They were stolen from the people that had homesteaded it. So the people on the left, the liberals, the Democrats, they were against war, they were against conscription, they were against taxation, because this is what the ruling class did to them. It treated them as essentially just one level above slavery. So the left position is pro-freedom. As you come up through the 1800s, there were many people fighting against the aristocracy, and some of them, including Marx, called themselves socialists, and their solution was to have a revolution which would be then against the authoritarian state. So that would be a leftist revolution. Then what they wanted to do was install another authoritarian state to distribute the wealth of the one they just overthrew. So they would have a leftist revolution, and then they'd install a new rightist government, authoritarian government.
Right.
So, and people of that era, I think, still consistently use that left-right usage.
Yeah.
And Bakunin was a contemporary. Bakunin wanted to, just like Marx, have a revolution against that rightist government, but he wanted to install no state, and he said that the state is the problem. So Bakunin is kind of the original left libertarian in that sense. Now when you come up into the 20th century, the Bolshevik Revolution, well, there was first a democratic revolution in Russia, then there was the Civil War, the Bolsheviks, and so they installed this new rightist government in that it's all authoritarian, and they call it the Communist Party. But a lot of people still call that the left, and then we go through a lot of confusion where some of the people that were originally pro-freedom, they sided with the authoritarian state in World War I and World War II because we had to fight off that other authoritarian state. So that you get this confusing view of how stuff works by calling having an authoritarian state for the United States, calling that being for freedom, because you're arguing, oh, it's for freedom from Germany because they're nasty, and if we don't fight them, they'll take over the world. Or later on in the anti-communist movement, you get this authoritarian state in the U.S. that has this massive defense buildup in the Cold War, and it's because we're pro-freedom. You know, we have authoritarianism for freedom.
Right.
And it's because we're against the left.
Yeah.
So the terminology of the left and right got really kind of confused along the way. When I was in college, there was the New Left, and they originally had some legitimate leftist concerns in the old sense. They were against the draft, they were against the war in Vietnam, they were for free speech, which was another one of the original issues. But then some of them were Trotskyists and Stalinists and all kinds of other things. And it's essentially, the New Left, I think, might have been pure originally, but got infiltrated, essentially, and taken on and directed towards forming a more social democratic government. People like the Clintons come out of that area. And again, I used to avoid confusion, I use more international terms, like social democratic is kind of a European term for what we would call a modern liberal here. Somebody who wants a big, powerful state for the children.
Right. You know? It's always for the children.
Yeah. So the libertarian left now is the libertarian movement that hews to a consistent pro-freedom stance everywhere. You know, the right to keep and bear arms, to own property, to be against war, free speech, in favor of free speech, and against this all-powerful authoritarian state.
Right. There is a tricky subject going on within Agorist communities right now, and it's the word capitalism. Let's say Marx. Konkin was obviously a pro-freed market guy, but how would Konkin have defined capitalism? And maybe what's the difference between agorism and anarcho-capitalism?
You ask these hard compound questions. Well, so I got to refer now to the other Konkin book, the White Book.
The White Book.
You know, so the reason I do that is because on page, I knew you'd ask this, 35, he finally tries to clear up the whole capitalism definition question in just, I think it's 2 sentences. And he says, sometimes the terms free enterprise and capitalism are used to mean free market. And he wants to clarify that. And that's what Roderick Long calls that conflationism. You use 2 terms that are opposite and you try to convince everybody they mean the same thing. So Konkin says, capitalism means the ideology, or parenthesis, ism, of capital or capitalists. Before Marx came along, the pure free marketeer, Thomas Hodgkin, had already used the term capitalism as a pejorative. Capitalists were trying to use coercion, the state, to restrict the market. In other words, they were against free markets. They wanted it all. They wanted to monopolize the market. Capitalism then does not describe a free market, but a form of statism, like communism. Now, why is this so hard in the movement? It's because some early 20th century economists, and later Ayn Rand, started popularizing the term capitalism to mean free markets. And historically it doesn't. And I was going through my notes and I actually found something that Chomsky says, Noam Chomsky, and so he's considered left, and a lot of right libertarians hate him because they think he's a raving social democrat, which he pretty much is, and just calls himself an anarchist. But he argues that the term, as it's used now, free trade, is Orwellian terminology, and that globalization is the process of global state capitalist intervention, or corporate mercantilism. He's repeatedly argued that corporate capitalism, as we know it, could not survive without massive state intervention and subsidy. So I believe he's right. You know, So if Ayn Rand comes along and she builds up a movement that has like, I don't know, 300,000 adherents, and they're all saying, oh, capitalism good, because it produces wealth. So what I think happened here was that Ayn Rand lost her way and was no longer consistently in favor of individual rights. She took a turn for being in favor of production and production of wealth. And so later on in her books, she talks about the producers versus the parasites. So that's her big paradigm. What happened, though, is the folks that big business enterprises that she so loved were the capitalists of the bad type. They utilized, technological innovation, but they also used capital and favor from the government to reach positions of massive power and destroy a lot of entrepreneurs. So libertarians are definitely for entrepreneurship, creativity, technology, but we're for the freedom for those people to enter into enterprises and not be squashed by some bigger business that has gotten, a lot of favor from government.
Right.
Now, anarcho-capitalism, where that came from, and this is kind of the etymological derivation, there was a guy named Jack Wallstein who was a follower of Ayn Rand, and he's thinking through her positions, and there was a whole lot of really logical thinking going on, and he says, well, you say you're for individual rights and the right to, I won't go into the whole thing, but anyway, he comes out and becomes essentially an anarchist. He believes the right to devolve from government or secede, further and further until you essentially don't need a government. So there's a couple of notable objectivist followers back then, Roy Childs and Jack Wallstein, who both became anarchists, and they wrote about it. Like Roy Childs wrote one called An Open Letter to Ayn Rand, and then Jack Wallstein wrote a piece called Society Without Coercion. So in Jared's article, he coins this term anarcho-capitalism because he thinks that's the best way to describe what he thought we should call ourselves if we didn't believe in a minimal government at least. Now, why he used the term capitalism was, I think he was still captured by the notion that capitalism is good because it means individual rights. Well, he essentially adopted Ayn Rand's mistake and didn't devolve beyond that. So, and the other thing was it was a reaction to anarcho-communism, or anarchists who felt that a communal lifestyle was the way to go and that they were against private property. But you can understand why they would be against property as it stood, because most of it was unjustly acquired. The property in the Americas came from grants from kings and things like that, and evolved after that. And then once corporations started to rise to power, they were only existing in the size they were because of the corporate privilege.
How dare you sympathize or empathize with a communist?
Well, so anarcho-capitalism has kind of like poisoned roots, the terminology. And now, what's so annoying is that anarcho-capitalism has this huge group of people that self-identify as anarcho-capitalists. And what they really mean, I think, in their hearts is free markets. But from what I just read earlier from Konkin is saying no, it originated to mean people who were opposed to free markets and wanted to monopolize things.
Got it.
So we have a big problem. It's ongoing, it seems like every day, with anarcho-capitalists. And there's a Facebook group called Agorism and Counter-Economics. And there's one guy that insists, and this thread has gone on for a month, that agorism is just a minor department within anarcho-capitalism or whatever. And I'm trying to set him straight day after day.
Right. Well, another one who is arguably pro-market, anti-capitalistic nowadays is Kevin Carson. And I'm sorry if this is a loaded question again, but I gotta do it. In an interview I saw online, Kevin Carson said that while Konkin has had some influence on his strategic interests, he parts ways with his emphasis on black market, profit-driven business firms, which are, in his words, basically counter-economic versions of the current state capitalist economy. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, I love Kevin Carson. I think he's probably one of the most influential writers in the left libertarian revival, as it were. And so everybody at a minimum should read, let's see how The Iron Fist. And it's The Iron Fist Behind the Invisible Hand. So Kevin's a mutualist, and I have to admit I don't really understand the full dimensions of mutualism, but I'm pretty much a proponent of it in my daily life. For example, I'm one of the founders of a cooperative, food cooperative where we live, and we're trying to do some other cooperative enterprises like hacker spaces and putting on expos and all that. So I'm definitely not against cooperation, but I think really in daily life we all have to profit. In other words, we have to get more out of things than we put in. I mean, the reason that you give up your time to go to work to a job is because they're going to pay you money, right? So
yeah.
You don't do it so much because you just love them, you know? So I don't know Kevin personally, although we've been on the same left libertarian discussion group for years. But I'd love to get him to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess next on the list would be, are there any agorist or counter-economic historical examples worth pointing out? And also, in a speech you gave, I think it was at Alt Expo, I'm not 100% positive, you talked about the Nalevo. Can you tell us what that is?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think the people of the world are in a long-term struggle to gain freedom. So, in Konkin's terminology, when you reach the agora, you've actually reached, a free market society. So, that being the goal, I would say that there's never been probably a really free society. But people have brought up obscure examples of like Ireland for 600 years or Iceland or whatever, and I just don't know enough about those eras. But I do know this, that whenever there's state control of marketplaces, people tend to trade outside of that marketplace to get what they need. So the example of probably the most totally controlled economy the world has ever seen was the Soviet Union. And so for 70 years, the state tried to own all the enterprises, the farms, the factories, everything, and control all consumption by, having ration stamps, and you had to get approvals for doing anything. So what out there, let's call it the Nalevo economy, or the left-hand economy. And I first read about that in Konkin. I think there's a lot more research that needs to be done on that. I'd like to have the time to do that research. I don't presently, but what I need to do is just use Mr. Google. Mr. Google knows everything. And I found a couple of articles. And so, and I've also interviewed a few Russians that now live in the U.S. So there's 4 levels in this one article of the Nalevo economy, and the top level was like the most benign, and that was you had ration coupons for food. So if you got a ration coupon for butter and you didn't really like butter, and somebody else got ration coupons for pork and they didn't really like pork, you could swap your ration coupons. Well, it was that's for agorists is the state isn't everywhere all the time, even in the Soviet Union, where the state supposedly is everywhere all the time. So the first level was ration coupons, or food ration coupons. The next level down was what they called blot, and that was trading favors. So for example, it's hard to realize this, but everybody in the Soviet Union worked for the government. So everybody is the state as an employee, and also everybody's a consumer, and everybody's being part of the oppression and the oppressed at the same time. So it's like, it's mind-boggling. But so at the same time, you know, they all want consumer goods and they're struggling to find ways to get things done. So let's say you're a bureaucrat and your plumbing leaks, and some guy comes in and he wants permission from you to do such and so, to travel or something. The bureaucrat has control over whether or not you get the signature, the permission. So he's got a marketable commodity now. So even within the state, there were commodities. And so the commodity he has to offer is permission. He can sign your little paper to give you permission to visit your grandmother. But if you have plumbing skills, you have a marketable commodity. You can fix his leaky plumbing, because through the state plumbing apparatus, it might take him 4 years to get his plumbing repaired. So I don't know the real details of this, but this was described as an off-the-books trading of favors, and so it was another kind of economy in the Nuevo. Then there were deeper levels. I think the deepest level was actually when it got into essentially coercive kind of criminal areas. But when I interviewed a couple of Russians, one of them said, well, yeah, he says, here's how it worked. It was more like theft, but it was theft of something that belonged to the government, and it was also originally stolen from you in the first place. In other words, you were compelled in the Soviet Union. You didn't voluntarily live that way. So he says, here's how it would work. Let's say you worked for what do you call, Public Works Department that repairs the roads, and you'd leave the shop in the morning with a truck that had a full tank of gas, and you'd go out to repair the roads. Well, what you'd do is you'd go out to the edge of town and sell the gas out of the tanks in your truck to somebody else. And you'd come back at the end of the day, and if you did it right, you know, nobody would have missed the amount that you sold. So you now had a commodity. You were in business. You were in the Nuevo economy. So anyway, it's an area that needs to be written about, but the whole point of it being, in the most oppressive state, you know, that there's probably ever been, there's always a counter economy.
Yeah, cool. Very interesting stuff. You know, I probably should have asked you this earlier when we were talking about Rand, but I'll ask it anyways. I understand that you began your libertarian journey as a follower of Rand of sort. What would be your advice to the objectivists out there what's the best way to communicate agorism to them?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did. Like I said, I met this fellow Bill in my history class, and he turned me on to it. He had me read The Fountainhead. So I became a big follower. At the Objectivism study group meetings, we would read The Objectivist and then the books that Ayn Rand recommended. So it was a real eye-opening experience, and it was interesting, and I learned a lot. But then when I started meeting people outside of that circle, I discovered there was more to the whole freedom movement. There were other economists, there were other ideas. When I met Konkin, you know, Konkin used to hang out with Murray Rothbard. It's kind of interesting that the libertarian movement now is fairly sizable, but at one point, they all fit in Murray's living room. And so there was Murray and Ayn Rand, both of them in New York City, and I don't know, some people would go one way and some would go the other as to who they followed. And so Ayn Rand practiced a couple of things that I began to learn throughout the years that were, I don't think, really consistent with her belief system, and they weren't consistent with building a big, consistently growing movement. Because literally, when I got into the movement, there had been a big rift between Ayn Rand and Nathaniel Branden, who was actually her lover, and they essentially broke up. But she decided to throw him out of the movement, and she threw out anybody else who would talk to him. So this kind of reminds me of some Facebook squabbles I've seen.
She doesn't sound like a tyrant.
Yeah. So here's the things I identified, and I ask anybody that's a follower of objectivism right now to look at it and see if you think this is consistent and if you can still hang in there with that. So one of them was, I think she was really more pro-production than being consistently for individual rights. And I'll give you two examples. She took a position in regards to the Native American Indians, and she said that since they didn't have a concept of rights, then the Europeans that came to North America who did have a concept of rights could go claim the land and have it by right or whatever. And that the Indians weren't using it for productive use anyway. The new Europeans were more advanced technologically and they were going to use it productively. So then it was okay. And it was okay if I guess you killed all the Indians that were in the way and objected to it. I posted that to your AAA group a couple of months back. The other one was a very similar position she took in the Israeli versus the Palestinian situation. She felt that it was okay to displace Palestinians from their ancestral homes because they were just a bunch of nomadic Bedouins anyway, and they didn't have a concept of rights. Turns out that she was even less correct there because Palestinians had cities and everything. So that's one thing, is being consistently for individual rights. I think if we were to confront or to encounter some Aboriginal people, I think there's probably a more peaceful way for us to both coexist on land. So the second thing is, I think Ayn Rand fostered a kind of individualism that went to an extreme that I call toxic individualism. So what that means is people take their individualism to such an extreme that they end up rejecting other people and actually making enemies of the other people. So what I remember is we would, we'd go to a party and we'd be arguing, some minor point. Well, this ties in with the other thing too. Let me think. Well, let me roll these two things in together. She also fostered what I call intellectual perfectionism. That's the point where you'll argue to the death over some minor little point. You could agree 99.5%, but on that last 0.5% of your beliefs, you had to fight to the death. And then if the other person didn't come along, then you had to reject them. You had to throw them out. So the objectivists that I've hung out with have essentially insisted that we're not going to have a free society until everybody agrees 100%. And these days I disagree with that. So then the fourth point was, I don't think she had like a full grasp on history and a ruling class analysis of what's going on. And so ruling class analysis was actually not started by Marx. It was started by a couple of libertarians that preceded him by, I think, a generation, Compton de Neuer. So, if you go back 250 or 300 years, it's very obvious that there's a ruling class because there's a king and an aristocracy and all that. And when you come down to modern times, a lot of folks don't, if you mention something like that even says ruling class or hints at it, they say, oh, you're silly, we're in America, we have equal rights here. But in actuality, and Carson goes into this a lot, essentially the aristocracy and the old wealth have kind of gotten a head start on everything, and they've got a head start on the land. The government granted them a lot of land, for example, in the Cape Railroads. So Ayn Rand sort of ignores, I think, a lot of that preceding history, and she doesn't look into how essentially this corporate elite that exists now is kind of a remnant of the subsidy of history, is what Carson calls it, and a lot of favor granted by the state. So anyway, I just say keep looking further than Rand. She's not the final answer, even though she's a starting point for a lot of people.
Cool, thank you. I've got a couple more questions, and I think I want to go ahead and open it up for a Q&A after that, and then maybe give you an opportunity to plug anything you wanted to press that I didn't cover.
Okay.
What do you think about using the Federal Reserve note in the counter economy? What do you think about silver? What do you think about gold? And what do you think about the famous Bitcoin?
Well, believing in freedom and free markets, freedom to choose, you'd want to use whatever works for you. And the thing about money, the basic rule of money is it only has value if other people will accept it in exchange. So in most of our daily transactions, the Federal Reserve note is kind of the only one that you can get everybody to take. Now, when you have a hyperinflation, people will start leaning towards accepting other things, especially if they think they'll hold value. So in my recent experience, there's a lot of people out there that when you offer them silver, they say, "What is this? Is this real?" And so they have no clue. And a lot of other people, and it turns out, I found, like I went around town with the Liberty Dollar in my town, and we went door to door to the different merchants. Well, guess who thought taking silver was the best idea? It was the immigrants. They had come from countries that had more corruption, believe it or not, than here. So people at the Indian restaurant, they wanted the silver. They wanted it in preference to the Federal Reserve notes. The poor silly Americans that knew nothing about history or whatever, they said, they wanted dollars. Don't give me that crap. What is that silver coin? Who wants that? Bitcoin, I think, is like a really interesting experiment. I'm a techie too, but I'm not an obsessively techie person saying that, it is the solution because it's high tech. It's only the solution for as long as it works. So if Bitcoin has some technical flaw, or if one of the big exchanges like Mt. Gox fails and you can't redeem your stuff, or if the FBI somehow figures out how to intercept it, or if Senator Rockefeller manages to pass a law outlawing it and it becomes less usable, them's the facts. We live in the context of this oppressive state. So Bitcoin may or may not last. It's worth trying, but I wouldn't put all your life savings into it. Even though some people who bought a lot of it when it was like a penny a Bitcoin, they've got a lot of Bitcoin wealth now. I don't know. And I believe there'll be other money systems that come after that. I mean, I think having some hard metal is a good idea all the time.
Yeah, Funkin was a gold bug, right?
Yeah, and he promoted gold like as the best. And so I only differ with him in one sense, and that is that the establishment, the ruling class, whatever you want to call it, the banking elite, they know gold is the best, and they've been hoarding it for hundreds of years, and they own, probably over half of the gold in circulation. So they still control the daily price fixing of gold. Through their captive legislatures, they've been able to outlaw gold at various different times. They've been able to either prevent it from being minted or have it minted again. So I think gold's awesome, but right now I think it's only one of the many possible monies. I actually favor silver for more practicality in a way, and we used to have this argument against bimetallism. You should have one standard, the gold standard, and not have a gold and a silver standard, because they'll fluctuate in value. Well, what they call silver is the poor man's gold, because you could actually afford to actually hold some of it and use it. So I'm not saying there's any one that's preferred. I believe in the free market. Let the market decide.
Sure. All right, I think I'll ask you one more question, then I'm going to allow you to go over whatever we may have not covered. Then we're going to go ahead and open it up for a question and answer period. But what do you think Samuel Edward Conklin III would say if he were alive today about the liberty community, about the freedom movement?
I think he would be
And
first.
what advice do you think he would have for us?
Advice? He would say read Kangen, but he would also hopefully have written a lot more too. And by the way, he did write a lot, but a lot of it was in short bursts in forum threads and things like that. So some of his followers from way back, we've been trying to gather up all of our different communications, and it'll probably by default end up in Vic Coleman's hands, Victor Coleman. He has a co-pubco, and they're the publishers of the New Libertarian Manifesto. They are co-pubco, and that's copubco.com. What do you think? I think he would be frustrated that agorism hasn't caught on more, and that was one of the things that I think we had talked about. It wasn't the popular part of the movement. It wasn't where the thrills were. It was more of a practical, slow building of a free market amongst us free marketeers. I think he would say, I told you so on a few things. He would say, you know, the fact that the Libertarian Party still doesn't have any significant impact on our freedom. He would say, I told you so, from the 70s. And I mean, no offense to anybody that's in the Libertarian Party and still believes in that, but if you're having questions about it, let's talk. We'll get off to the side and we'll talk about it and what the agorist alternative actually provides. You don't actually have to. The thing is, agorism and the counter economy don't run counter to human nature. You don't have to change human nature. People always want to, you know, have an enterprise, not be taxed and regulated to death. There's a book. Let's see. I've got a note on that. I've got notes spread out everywhere. It's called The Stealth of Nations. And in that book, and I forget the author's name, he talks about the underground economy in countries all over the world. So in some countries, the majority of the transactions are in the counter economy, and the state apparatus is like really helpless to stop it. So he would say, keep on educating. And for example, the New Libertarian Manifesto, it talks about the New Libertarian strategy, and it's in 4 phases. Actually 5 if you include stage 0. But we're still just in stage 1 of that, and that is basically education and recruiting and building up a low-density agorist society. I don't know if that shows up at all. But by the way, everybody, Harlan's stocked up on these, so be sure to get your copy before it runs out. But you can get this online too if you go to agorism.info, and there's a PDF copy there. You should print it out, underline, highlight, circle things, and get back together with Joel and the other agorists in Austin and discuss it.
Very cool. Thank you. Before we open it up for a Q&A, is there anything that we didn't go over that you'd really like to have everyone understand?
Yeah, there are a few things. Like, even though I'm pushing this, the book was written from ideas developed in 74 and 75 and on to 1980. The first edition of this was published in 80, but, you know, we're all smart, creative, innovative people, and we can innovate beyond just the manifesto itself. And I want to talk about a couple of project ideas, and I've had these debates with other people in the libertarian movement. I'm just looking through my notes here. And they say, well, you know, what's so great about agorism? We're out here, we're getting candidates elected, we're changing laws. Can you point to one law you've gotten appealed using agorism? And I'm going like, you don't get it. This is not about, you know, appealing laws. This is about creating a free society that is not, it's resistant to this state apparatus. How do I measure the progress? And again, that's a logical fallacy. It's like, it's not a popularity contest to see which style of activism is most popular. But anyway, I came up with an idea that I want everyone everybody to consider for a metric for how to measure our freedom and how to measure if we're making progress. So I call it the freedom factor. So it's really simple. You'd self-rate using a website with a questionnaire how free you were. And it would be from 0 to 100%. And I have to admit, the idea for this came about with the carbon footprint thing, the Carbon Coalition. And I think you just go to, it's either carbonfootprint.com or carboncoalition.com. And you can take the test and you can rate your carbon footprint. And then if you really want to change and reduce your carbon footprint, it would have some suggestions. So my idea is like a similar kind of rating system. We'd go online, we'd answer a questionnaire, and we'd come out with a number between 0 and 100 for our freedom factor. And then, let's say you came out with a 27.4% freedom factor when you rated yourself. You just go, wow, I'm not very free. What can I do to increase my freedom? And there would be some suggestions. And the freedom factor would cover all the areas of your life where you felt you weren't free. It could cover personal, here's my note, personal freedom, financial freedom, even your emotional freedom. And there was like a real popular libertarian psychology and psychiatry going on at the time, the early part of the movement in the 70s. Because essentially a lot of people were not emotionally free because they were like so locked into the propaganda that came from both the state and the church, sorry to say. So anyway, the freedom factor, this is a project we'd have to work on. And if we did this correctly, we might be able to even rate our town, like the freedom factor for our town. How can we raise the freedom factor for our town or our state or our national or our continental state of freedom? So this is just a project that I would love to get half a dozen of us or so together on and work on it and actually publish something, a web page. And then sort of another kind of project idea is, you know, the goal of being in the counter economy is to make that economy vibrant and to offer us all the goods and services we need. But also, one of the services is our security, our, you know, how we live a safe life, you know, against invasion, if you know what I mean, not wink wink, invasion from folks who want to steal our money and control our lives. So there are going to have to be some enterprises that start up to do that, whether they're profit-making or cooperative, doesn't matter. So I thought of another concept, I call it the Freedom Fund. Well, up in New Hampshire where I am, they actually started a civil disobedience fund. And so, for example, people would donate to that, and so if somebody gets arrested for civil disobedience, the fund could at least send them some money for their commissary account while they were in jail. It was never big enough to pay people's legal fees, although I think they did donate a couple of times to people's legal fees. But anyway, because of the internet now, you can publicize this all over the world. And, you know, if a guy has a $2,000 legal bill, you can get $10 contributions from all over the world, and it wouldn't take that many to pay that legal bill. But the thing about that was that it actually encouraged more civil disobedience, which is this huge money sink, because, you know, it's really expensive to get arrested, besides lost income and legal bills, fines and penalties and all that. Eventually, if you get arrested enough times, it's really demoralizing. You're essentially out on the street, homeless, your girlfriend leaves you, she can't take it anymore. You know, it's negative, whereas agorism and the counter economy, it promotes us being in enterprises and actually building our capital and becoming more and more prosperous. When we're more prosperous, we can afford to pay for security type functions. So anyway, the Freedom Fund was the other idea. And so that was different than the Civil Disobedience Fund. And one of the ways I thought about this was, like a lot of times I had the opportunity to choose between going on a toll road and the older highway that doesn't have a toll. And I said, well, what if I had a jar in the car, and instead of paying the $1 toll, I'll go on the old road and pitch $1 into the Freedom Fund. So this is another idea that needs development, but it was, and you know what we should also figure out is how to make this decentralized, and so there's no one central place that can be rated. Right. I wanted to build up a fund so in case Joel gets busted for selling underground t-shirts, you know, we can jump in and help defend him.
Yeah.
So that was the Freedom Fund idea. There's been an idea kicking around to go beyond the manifesto and create a new libertarian handbook. And this would be sort of like a Boy Scout handbook. I don't know if anybody's seen the Boy Scout handbook, but you know, you flip to one page and it's how to build a fire. And you flip to the next page, it's how to, you know, set up a lean-to shelter at night. And then all this how-to stuff. So I think there's room for that.
Very cool.
Now I got one other area. What he talks about, I could go to the page number, but we need to be building alliances with other organizations. So, you know, this is the opposite of Ayn Rand's approach. Ayn Rand's approach was, we have to make everybody intellectually perfect before we can work with them. So the opposite of that is we ally with people that are intellectually imperfect on issues that we have in common. So I call that the alternative communities strategy. So there's already these communities out here that have an interest. So like the homeschooling community, that's a whole bunch of people that are opposed to the public education system for their kids right now today. There are already people that are into alternative monies, like the Bitcoin community. So the Bitcoin community already has this huge overlap with the libertarian community. There's alternative medicine, alternative energy, all these groups that have some issues. So what we've done in New Hampshire is we hold this thing called the Alternatives Exposition, or the Alt Expo. And what that is an attempt to get all those different groups that have one issue, but they've already decided that they want to be different than the way the state does it, the mainstream practice. So our idea is to get them all together in one big expo, and so the alternative medicine people can learn about alternative money, and the alternative schooling people can learn about alternative energy. And essentially what we would be building is this whole alternative economy, same as the counter economy or something similar. And we also need to be building this community of common interests and common bonds, whereas like in Ayn Rand's intellectual perfectionism, she tended to repel or reject people that weren't perfect. We would try to cross-mentor each other in the skills that we have. So building alliances is important. And so I listed a few things that I thought were great groups that are already out there for us to like join in and work with and try to influence them to a more libertarian position. So there's co-ops, like we have a food co-op, there's all kinds of other co-ops. A couple of states are forming cooperative alliances so that the co-ops, like there's a housing co-op, there's a food co-op, there's a medical co-op, and to sort of bring them together and have them all attend another convention of cooperatives and be involved together in a directory of cooperative services. So they're creating an alternative cooperative economy. Credit unions, you should use them instead of banks. In the Occupy movement, they had a big day they called Bank Transfer Day. That was to transfer your money out of a big bank into a cooperative, into a credit union. And the other thing, in the credit union movement, a lot of the libertarians are trying to get on the board of directors of their cooperatives and encourage the co-op itself, of their credit union. Credit union is just a cooperative that deals with money instead of natural foods. But anyway, to get the credit union to accept bitcoins, silver, and all kinds of alternative monies, which they easily can. One thing I discovered fairly recently is the freelancers union. So all of the folks that work independently, and there's a huge number of people that work independently, they're already sort of thinking out of the box. They're already outside the mainstream. So this woman lawyer in New York City started the Freelancers Union, and it's pretty interesting. I think it's freelancersunion.com or .org. The Alt Expo, you guys should have an alternatives exposition in Austin. I already talked to John Bush about that once. Another group that's really, really interesting because they're anti-intellectual property is the Pirate Party, and they came about because of because the Pirate Bay got busted. So there's pirate parties. Now they are into parliamentary politics, but I think they could be swayed to do a different kind of politics. And by the way, Konkin said he was very political, and politics in that sense just means talking to other people and trying to persuade and influence other people. But he was opposed to parliamentary politics. So he was parliamentarian, and pro-political.
Right.
So the Pirate Party has a lot of really interesting people in it, and it's like worldwide. I think there's pirate parties in like 70 different countries now. I think the website is pp-international.com, Pirate Party International, but you can just do a Google search for your local pirates. The Transition Towns movement, that movement is involved in being concerned about peak oil and running out of petroleum, which I don't really think we're going to run out of petroleum anytime soon. I have some inside info there, but the Transition Towns people are also promoting local economies and alternative currencies. So in the town I'm in a Transition Towns group, and we have a hour exchange, which is like a time bank. The Occupy movement is another movement. Like, they may be a little dormant right now, but there's a lot of really good people, and they're opposed to the banking system as it is. The banking bailout really got on them, as it did the Tea Party. And there was actually talk at one point of a kind of a coalition between the Tea Party and the Occupy movement. So that's interesting how politics is different than you think. It's not Republicans and Democrats anymore. It's like everybody's pissed off, and they're trying to figure out ways to fight back. So, geez, we've gone way past an hour.
Well, I think it's probably appropriate to open it up for a question and answer period.
Sure, let's do it.
Thanks a lot for your time, by the way. Did anyone have a question for Jack relating to liberty, freedom, agorism in the back?
Yeah, I'm wondering about the strong division between agorism and voting for libertarians. Can't you be agorist all the time and then take 10 minutes of your day, one day of the year to vote for a libertarian? What's wrong with that?
Excellent. Did you hear that?
Can you repeat it?
Yeah. Basically, he was asking, what's the problem with voting? Why can't we spend the majority of our time practicing counter-economics, and also maybe 10 minutes out of your day to go vote for someone who's a libertarian candidate, all in hopes to eliminate coercion? Is that ultimately okay? Cool.
Okay, the voting issue. There's like a ton of articles and essays about this, so I'll just cover the highlights. But if you're against the state and you're a libertarian, voting is an objectively statist act, not an objectively libertarian act. So what I mean by that is it actually gives power to the state. Konkin actually calls that, when you're running for office, he calls that being an out-of-power statist. It's somebody who's statist at heart, but they're just, at the current moment, they're out of power. So Libertarian Party people are trying to get in power, even though they, by their own words, they say, no, I'll get elected and I'll repeal a bunch of laws. The practical side of it is that each of us only have a certain amount of time, money, and energy to commit to the movement. And if you really believe in building the counter-economy, but instead you spend some of your time, money, and energy helping the state, you actually are sort of counteracting all the things that you do in the counter-economy. And you're keeping the counter-economy from having the benefit of, your input into it for that amount of time. So it's like, I don't know, I could go on and on, but I just think voting is worse than counterproductive. I think it gives power to the enemy.
I see. I hope that answered your question. Cool.
I can send you some links.
Cool. I mean, if I mean,
I'm not really sure if this question. I just wanted to kind of go back to and make a brief comment regarding your distinction between anarcho-capitalism and agorism. And I mean, I realize that your intentions are good in doing this, but I mean, I would consider myself both an anarcho-capitalist and an agorist, depending on the context, you know, or the situation in which I find myself, or in discussion with someone. And basically, I don't know. It just seemed to me like you're nitpicking about the language that people use when the reality of the principles that we believe and how we act are actually the same. So, you know, I believe in the principle of free markets just like you do. So why does it matter what I call myself, in essence, or what anybody calls themselves, as long as the actions are the same and the principles behind them?
Okay, I got that question. Yeah, I'm not the type that's going to criticize you for your actions. I mean, I'm all for you. I'd reach out and pat you on the back as a comrade, you know. It's more of a PR problem, because you got to remember the libertarian movement is this like tiny little segment of the whole entire population. And within our movement, we're all arguing about what we should call ourselves and what the meaning of this, that, and the other is. But when you go outside of our circle, you know, the whole rest, 99.99% of the population, they're going to get some first impression. So I agree that the word capitalism is problematical in that there's 2 or 3 definitions running around. And like Gary Chartier, he has a paper on this. He says, why advocates of free markets should oppose capitalism. So it's kind of a long title, but it's a good place to go on that. Some of the anarcho-capitalists that I know, they think, oh yeah, we all know that capitalism is a good thing because Hayek used the word capitalism and Rand used it to mean free markets. But to tell you the truth, you know, I think that the most of the rest of the population probably understands the usage of the word capitalism better to mean a system where the capitalists, that is the very wealthiest people, the people that manipulate the money, basically the people that started the Federal Reserve System, those are the people most people call the capitalists. You can read Tragedy and Hope on that. They're the financial capitalists. They're the people that manage to actually capture governments through the control of their money systems. So the libertarian movement is rightfully anti-capitalist in that it's opposed to everything the capitalists do. And so is a lot of the rest of the left. And I call the libertarian movement a movement on the left. The capitalists are the folks that sort of succeeded the feudal aristocracies in controlling everything, controlling all markets, controlling money systems, controlling governments. So the use of the term anarcho-capitalism just makes things confusing and difficult when you talk to the rest of the people. That's my not short enough answer, but...
Cool. Thank you. Willie, go for it.
I also had a question about voting. In particular, if we presume for a moment that the 2 parties that we have are not expanding government control at an equal rate, would it not be unfair to say that voting for the lesser of the evils is not more than counterproductive?
You had several negatives in a row there. I probably lost track of them, but I think I know the question.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's the lesser of 2 evils question. Well, you know, this has been debated over and over again too, and maybe the best thing for me to do would be to send a link to a bunch of articles, a bunch of essays. But you know, the quick answer that we used to have is the lesser of 2 evils is still evil. You know, like I got this cartoon of people lined up at the voting booth, and the ones that are in the Republican line, they're in line and they're all saying, I want to vote for less evil. And they're both voting for an evil system. And what's needed is this third anti-evil place that you can vote. The voting system right now, the 2-party system, is rigged. And not only that, it's you know, they planned it that way. I mean, if you go to Tragedy and Hope, there's a section in there that talks about how the Morgan interests came up with this plan, you know, how they're going to make it so that they essentially control both parties, and they're going to whipsaw the population back and forth between one party and the other, and they're going to like create this system of democracy theater where they can keep all the population involved and thinking that they're voting for less evil when they're really just being used. Their energies are being consumed. I call it hamster wheel activism. You get in there and you advocate for your party, and I'm gonna, you know, put all my energies into trying to get this guy elected. And then when the election's over, you get out of the hamster wheel and you're back where you began. So I'm just advocating, if you're gonna put that much energy into something, let's put it into building the counter economy and let these political hacks, you know, have their day. And basically what Conkin said is if enough of us stop voting, like right now the voting, you know, the politicians always bemoan how few people vote. And when I'm going, yay, few people vote, that's good. So what we want is a situation where fewer and fewer people vote. And when it gets down to the point where like only 5% of the people vote, the rest of us might really be able to ignore them. They can't really go around claiming they have a mandate from the people anymore. Anyway, end of rant.
Excellent. Serene, you had a question.
Hi, Jack. I chat with you sometimes on the book face and stuff like that. So I just had a question because I know that you're doing a salon or discussion group in North Dakota, I think.
Yeah.
Do you have any other, I guess, ideas for people to get together or strategies for people to actually like meet up, talk, network? I mean, I know this is great, but sometimes in the agorists and, you know, libertarian movement, people don't, you know, they're kind of nerdy and stuff. They spend a lot of time reading and they're more INTP and not as extroverted or whatever. How do you find people? Like, what are some tools that you use to chat with people and build the economy with them, so to speak?
So if I get it, it's how do you start a discussion group and then how do you get people to come?
Well, yeah, both. Like, yeah, because they're not really talkative people, and you know, sometimes.
The internet makes all of this easier, reaching people, and there's all these new search features within Facebook, which I don't use yet. But here's what I found: like most towns of any size have a Barnes & Noble bookstore or a local bookstore. So I'm Harlan. If I'm sent by saying the evil bookstore name, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I outlasted the one on this street.
Oh, good work. So what happens is bookstores are good places, coffee shops are good places. It can sometimes start out with like 2 or 3 of you. You know, Sam Conkin started a group in Los Angeles called the Carl Hess Club, and they met in a restaurant. So coffee shops and bars and pubs have been, you know, traditional places to start the revolution in. There was a place in Boston called the Green Dragon Tavern, and apparently that's where they met and plotted the Boston Tea Party. So I actually wanted to have a meeting at the Green Dragon Tavern. Well, now it's kind of like a nightclub, and it's a singles meat market kind of place. But I say start, you know, find a coffee shop, start a Facebook group page, you know, put yourself and your best bud that want to go out for coffee on a routine basis in as members, and then just try to build it from there. Like Austin ought to be great for that. You can probably use Brave New Books, but if you want to meet in a coffee shop, like what we used to do is we'd have meetings in somebody's home, but that was actually a burden to the homeowner because they had to be there, they had to clean up before the meeting so their house wasn't a mess, and then they had to clean up the snacks and coffee residue afterwards. So we started going to public places because then like let's say the meeting's normally at your house and you have to go out of town that week, then you have to figure out a way to contact everybody and tell them an alternative location. So if you just have it at a public place, that makes that easier. And then I think the best thing to do is have it on the same night of the week, same time every week, so you don't have to necessarily send out announcements. You just say, every Wednesday at 7 p.m. there's a Freedom Forum, and that's the one I started in Nashua. And it's been going on for like 18 years, so I'm actually doing some work out in North Dakota, so I'm in this town that has a couple of good coffee shops. So I started the Mondac Freedom Forum, the Montana, North Dakota Freedom Forum.
Very cool.
Thanks.
My friend Richard Rody from San Antonio wasn't able to make it tonight, and I promised I'd ask this in the Q&A. What he was curious about was what you thought about local militias taking on police monopoly by keeping peace and ensuring the policing, ensuring that just policing is administered in different communities. So like private defense agencies that like private options that you can opt into.
One thing is you got to be real careful when you're dealing with folks that have a lot of guns, like the police. So, but it is, I think, an important function that some people are beginning to see to have, you know, some sort of neighborhood watch, and I think you can begin at that level and be fairly non-controversial. And you could get to know the police, and you could make sure it's known that you're using, you know, cameras and video, and that you're patrolling the neighborhood and everything. So there's a bunch of groups that are already doing that. There's actually a way, like after 9/11, even George Bush was promoting this, you know, let's everybody watch everybody else, you know, and they had a site all set up that you could sign up for it. So I thought it was a good idea if libertarians signed up and essentially in a way became part of the system. But this is an independent system from government, and by being part of it, we could actually fairly well keep that system operating on a just basis. And of course there's a lot of people that I would turn in, you know, like anybody that read your email would be a criminal in my mind, so that includes the NSA, you know. So I'd have to turn those guys in, see if we could get them reined in.
Awesome, thank you. Anyone else with any other questions?
Well, does he need to go, or?
Yeah, sure. Jack, do you have enough time for a couple more, or?
Oh, sure.
Well,
I think I could hold it a little bit longer before I have to go to the bathroom after drinking all this coffee.
Yeah. Sure, so a couple more and then we'll call it.
Unless someone else has one,
Go for
it. Back when capitalism and, you know, the different interpretations of that definition. So you have to start with an entrepreneur that has nothing and builds a company up to worth hundreds of millions of dollars. At what point do they become, quote, an evil capitalist? Is it when they start colluding with the state that we don't like, or, you know, is there a problem with them building a very profitable mega corporation as long as they're not in it with the state?
Did you get that?
Yeah, I think I got it. Yeah, so I think that question, you know, no offense intended, it exhibits part of the problem in understanding the difference between capitalism and free markets. So, for example, here's the red book. We've got the black book and the white book. This one's called Agorist Class Theory. And so Sam, he wrote a series of articles called Agorism Contra Marxism. And what he examined was, you know, Marx just looked at capital and labor. He only had these two classes. So in agorism, we look at a third class, and that's the entrepreneuriat, or the entrepreneurial class. So the guy you're talking about that builds a big enterprise because he has great ideas and he has great products and all that, he's an entrepreneur. That's different than the traditional capitalist class. The capitalist class has money but no ideas and no labor. So they have to get labor, but you know, like right now, they hire a bunch of engineers because they have money, and those are the guys with the ideas, or they hire marketing people or whatnot. There's actually new ways to get around the traditional old capitalist class now. So people who have ideas can go to like Indiegogo and raise capital that way, Kickstarter, things like that. So, you know, I think the agorist, the anti-capitalist agorist or left libertarian, is all for entrepreneurship and building businesses and making a profit, regardless of what Kevin Carson says. And, so go for it. The evil capitalists are the ones, again in Konkin's words, who, or in my words, let's say, uses his capital to buy politicians to write laws in his favor. Or in the case of the banker bailout, you know, what was his name? The Treasury Secretary back then, who used to be head of Goldman Sachs. He was all but threatening Congress with blood in the streets if they didn't bail out the banks. So he's a prime example of the capitalist class. He has capital. He's trying to influence government to, in this case, give him billions of dollars because they screwed up in their banking business. So the entrepreneur that builds up a business isn't what we would call a capitalist. He's an entrepreneur. And we try to not conflate those two terms.
Thanks a lot, Jack. Hey, but before we let you go, where can we watch some of the things that you've done, some of the speeches you've given, and follow what your next move is?
Well, I don't have that many, but we did start this thing called the Alternatives Expo. So we did start, I think about 2011, videotaping, and that's where I have a few talks. So if you go to youtube.com/altexpo. And by the way, I want to keep the dialogue going as much as possible too, so if you want to have further questions, we could probably put it on the Facebook event page, right? And I could answer them there.
That sounds good.
And I can put links to various different things there. I also want to put in a plug for you, Joel, because like a lot of people don't know how much work an organizer goes through behind the scenes and tries to get you guys to pay attention and to come out from your comfortable homes at night. So I want to reach across the interwebs and give you a pat on the back for doing it. And I want you guys to support this guy and buy the seats. Some other time. Big hand for you.
Thank you. All right, Jack. Well, we have all really enjoyed the conversation tonight, and we're definitely going to have you back on in the future. So, thanks a lot. But all right, Jack. We'll go ahead and let you go, and we'll talk in the future.
Sounds great, man. Everybody have a great time tonight at the rest of the event.
Here we are. Thank you for sitting through that. That was a little longer than I expected, but I felt it was fairly interesting. So now we're going to hang out and party and get drunk and eat food. And But I wanted to give everyone an opportunity. This is totally going to be loose. So if you want to talk about what you're doing, if you're selling or trading shirts or candles or kale or anything like that, Derek, if you want to plug what you're doing in Houston, Derek Bros is here, everybody. Derek Bros in the house. Doesn't let me sit. Yeah, seriously, if you have anything you want to plug, feel free. This is going to be a sort of an open mic section. If not, come on up and take the mic. If not, then like I said, we're just going to hang out and network with one another. Come up, talk about what you're doing. Derek. Derek Bros.
I thought I was smart, I thought I was right. I thought it better not to fight. I thought there was a virtue in always being cool. So it came time to fight. I thought I'll just step aside, and that the time would prove you wrong. If it's not now, then tell me when it would be the time. She would stand up and be a man. For to lose I could accept, but to surrender I just wept and regretted this moment. Oh, I don't know where the sun leaves and the starlight begins. It's all a mystery. And I don't know how a man decides what's right is or not. It's all a mystery. Cause I'm a man, not a boy, and there are things you can't avoid. You have to face them when you're not prepared to face them. If I could, I would, but you're with him now, I do no good. I should have fought him, but instead I let him. Let him tell me where something ends and the starlight begins. It's all a mystery. And I don't know how a man decides what's right is or not. It's all a mystery.
The test is over.
What do we have going on here?
Now